Are you ready to listen to my dad Joe and Uncle Justin talk about sports? Now on with the show!
The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is brought to you by Mays Sandwich Shop, which have been serving the greater West Lawn area delicious food for over 70 years. You are listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show.
Boring.
A weekly podcast about sports since 2011.
Don't you ever get tired of being wrong all the time?
With a focus on football.
Kansas City 31, San Francisco 20. Mahomes takes the snap. He's just going to throw it long for Demarcus Robinson. It is going to use up all the time. The game is over, and the Chiefs' kingdom has firmly planted its flag on top of football's highest summit. The Kansas City Chiefs are champions of Super Bowl 54.
Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffoff. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Mays, and phoning in again this week to abide by the global pandemic, rules as they have become, is Mr. Justin Raffoff.
Yeah, here we are, away from each other again, but that's kind of the safe and the way we should do it, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's the new normal, right? That's where we're at now as we chug along here
Right.
through past the 3-week mark. If you're going by when at least the Wilson School District shut down at the end of day on Thursday, March 12th. And since then, things have been rapidly changing, not necessarily for the better. And here we are on April 5th with episode 302 of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. But we have another fun sports topic this evening. Despite there being no sports in the last, 24 days or so?
Yeah, way too long.
Yeah.
And was it you? Was it last week that you brought up that Adam Schefter or somebody had tweeted like how long it's been since there's been an April with no professional sport?
Yeah, he got it from Elias that there's been
and
at least one of the major 4 sports, and obviously football hasn't been played in the spring. It was always baseball, basketball, or hockey. I think it had been, 137 years, if I'm remembering correctly.
Something crazy,
Yeah, it was the last time there wasn't any major professional sport, at least in America, was in April, what would that be, 1873, is that right? Am I doing my math right? No, 1883. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1883.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm blanking. I'm unable to do math at the moment, so. But that's okay. That's okay. We don't have to be known for our math. What are we talking about tonight? Oh, a lot of stuff based on statistics. So
yeah,
it's a good thing math is failing me at the moment, but that's fine. It's okay. So we are going to do something. It's sort of an abbreviated or a slightly different or tangential to something we wanted to do weeks ago for our, kind of our own March Madness type thing, a bracket challenge. We were going to whittle down our favorite player for each of the Philadelphia sports teams. And then, the coronavirus stuff kind of got in the way and switched things up. And we decided to change that because we were going to start at the weekend that they had announced that March Madness wasn't going to be happening. So it kind of felt a little off to do our own bracket type thing. So maybe we'll revisit that some year. But we pivoted, and Justin came up with an idea of doing our own Mount Rushmores of Philadelphia sports. So this evening, we are going to examine the Phillies, Flyers, Sixers, and Eagles in that order and say what our foursome would be that, in our opinion, and each of us individually, not as a collective show, represent those 4 professional clubs from the city of brotherly love. And I think it's going to be fun. It was an interesting exercise, especially for me. I've I could have easily done without much research the Phillies and Flyers. The Sixers, I had a pretty good idea because I don't think more than a handful of people really stand out. And when you're talking about longevity, that kind of knocks down a few, I think, obvious ones that people might have considered. But then Eagles for me was tougher because I think I, off the top of my head, had only one or two. So I had to look into that one a little bit more. But it'll be interesting for us to talk about each one of those. And I guess before we dive into that and start, we're going to start with the baseball team, the Phillies. I just do want to put the contact info up since we've been doing the show now for over 9 years and we're over 300 episodes. Just want to remind everyone how to contact us. You can do so at the Mays Sandwich Shop email inbox, Joe Mays and J-Raff at gmail.com. You can also give us a call on the Mays Sandwich Shop hotline, which is 530-563-6297. I don't know if that'll work properly tonight because that is currently how Justin is calling in to be on this show. So maybe the best chance for you to be heard this evening to give your Mount Rushmore or submit a question is to do so via the email or on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Look for at Joe Mays and J-Raff or at Joe Mays and J-Raff show. So we're going to start with the Phillies. And I'm going to start with the Phillies first, let you do the Phillies, and then you're going to go back and do the Flyers. So we're kind of rotate in that manner.
Okay.
So I'll go first, you go second, and then you go first, and I'll go second. We'll just rotate through them like that. So up first, and I don't know, you probably don't have this pulled up in front of you, but I have on my image. We'll see how many people can guess before I start talking about them. So my Philadelphia Sports Rushmore for the Phillies, and it is up on the video now if you're watching on Facebook Live, Periscope, or YouTube. From left to right, hopefully people can figure it out. I tried my best to shove their faces on that mountain, and it is Mike Schmidt, Harry Kalas, Chase Utley, and let's see, who was the last one I picked? Any guesses out there? It was tough. I'm not gonna lie. It was very, very tough for who to decide. But the last one I did was Richie Ashburn.
Okay, I was gonna say Philly Fanatic.
No, I was thinking about that, but I had no problem considering things like founders and owners and broadcasters and things like that. But I didn't go into the mascots because I think the Fanatic over the last 35 years or so now, as we are hearing based on the lawsuits, Fanatic is quite easily and may possibly be the most recognizable mascot, at least in North American professional sports. So he definitely, I wouldn't argue against him being included, but I did stick with the people of the actual human variety. So
fair enough.
Yeah, so that was my top four, and that's not really in any order. That's the way that I shoved their faces on the mountain in the picture I made. So Mike Schmidt, I think most people listening to the show will agree that not only is he the greatest Phillies player of all time, he is the greatest third baseman in Major League history. So I don't think there's any way that you could exclude Mike Schmidt from being on the Phillies Rushmore. And, what is there left really to say about Harry Kalas? He was the voice. It's someone that people just attached to. He was, to a lot of people, he was like another grandparent, at least in the later years and the years leading up to his unfortunate passing, and then the Phillies winning the World Series in his final full season, calling the games. He's someone that was intimately attached to Phillies baseball, and someone that when someone mentions the Phillies to me, Harry Kalas is easily one of the first people that I think of. Then third, I wanted someone from the modern era of winning the 2008 World Series, and I could have picked from a variety of people, including Jimmy Rollins, Ryan Howard, Cole Hamels, and I have a lot of love for Carlos Ruiz, but I think overall, in terms of productivity across the board and his all-time willingness to improve, I had to go with Chase Utley, who Harry Callis refers to as the man in that incredible clip. But I can't really argue against any of those others modern era guys being included on there. In terms of wins above replacement, which is one of my favorite stats that the Baseball Sabermetrics use, Chase Utley ranks second in Phillies history. He's not close to Mike Schmidt, but no one is close to Mike Schmidt. But Chase Utley is second, and I wish things would have ended better for him in Philadelphia, but injuries kind of ended a lot of the people that we associate with the glory days of the Phillies from 07 to 2011 or so, 2012. But Chase Utley, I think, deserves to be on there. And then the last spot was the toughest for me because I was down to a few people. Richie Ashburn, who ended up getting the nod for me. I felt like I wanted to include him, but then I was like, wow, I don't really have any pitchers. So what pitcher could I possibly put on there? And 4 came to mind. One I already mentioned in Cole Hamels. But looking overall at his statistics, while I think he was on par or close to the metrics of Curt Schilling, I favored Hamels because of him winning the World Series and the World Series MVP. But he also was overshadowed by two other pitchers, one of which, both pitched in the World Series, one won in Steve Carlton and then Robin Roberts. So it was kind of a 3-man race between Richie Ashburn, Robin Roberts, and Steve Carlton. And in the end, I went with another positional player in Richie Ashburn. And I think the tiebreaker there was his broadcasting career after the fact. So he kind of had the 1-2 punch for me in Philadelphia, being both a prolific player and batter and then broadcasting with Harry Callis for so many years. So just to recap, my Phillies or my Mount Phillies is Schmidt, Callis, Utley, and Ashburn.
All right. So and like I said, and like you said, I can't really argue. I'm not going to argue like necessarily against any of those. I really like, some of those picks, and they're gonna, there is a little bit of overlap here. So when I look at mine, I'll get the one right away that's going to be the overlap, is going to be Mike Schmidt. And like you said, I know some of our listeners, specifically maybe Baltimore Orioles specific listeners, may argue that, they had some pretty legendary third basemen as well. And I would agree with that. And they've got a couple guys who can probably argue for like the second best third baseman of all time. But Mike Schmidt is the best third baseman of all time. And like we did when we did this a few years ago, when we looked at how, like, who was the best baseball player of all time. And like Mike Schmidt in terms of third base is the best, and it's not really that close in my opinion.
No, you're right.
But anyway, I absolutely agree with some of those, but Mike Schmidt has to be on there. I'm going to go.
Sorry, not to cut you off, just to emphasize your point there. The Athletic, which we always talk about, these are not paid sponsorships from them. Justin and I just really love the coverage of The Athletic. During the quarantine here, when no live sports are happening, they've been coming up with ideas to keep, articles going out. One of the best that they did recently, which one is that always interests me, is like the best player to ever wear a jersey number. And they did team-specific ones, but they also did league-specific ones. So baseball did one recently, and Mike Schmidt was the choice for number 20. And they go into talking about third baseman and the Orioles always usually getting upset that it's not Robinson. But yeah, Mike Schmidt has to be part of your Phillies mountain. I can't see how you could ever leave him off. And Justin and I nailed that one together perfectly. However, the other 3 are all different. And I mentioned all of his other 3, but I'll let him talk about why he included them now.
Yeah, so when I look at Carlton, Steve Carlton will go down as one of the best left-handed pitchers of all time. And that's why I had him on the list. I know he had some years before he was in Philly, but he was a huge part He was on the team with Mike Schmidt that brought the first World Series to Philadelphia before our lifetime. But just when you look at some of those, when you look at his numbers over the years, just incredible numbers. He won 28 games one year as a Philly. Like that's crazy. But you look at some of those just kind of nuts. Robin Roberts was another one that's on there. And again, I feel like I was kind of splitting hairs. When you look at like Richie Ashburn and some of the other guys there, it was really tough to kind of pick. The Phillies don't have the history in terms of like the number of Hall of Famers as some of the other teams. But when I look at like Robin Roberts or Richie Ashburn, some of those guys, you could pick any of them and put them on there. Absolutely. I went with Robin Roberts. The one that's kind of like people may like question a little bit for me is Jimmy Rollins, but I went kind of, and it's crazy because we've been talking a lot about like statistical things and rightfully so. But I feel like Jimmy Rollins was one of those guys that they really kind of, I don't think they have the success a decade ago or a decade plus ago without him. You know what I mean? Like he brought some of that swagger, and yeah, he had to be reeled in sometimes. He got benched in New York for showing up late and things like that. But he was also the guy to go out in spring training and say, we're the team to beat when everybody was picking the Mets. You know what I mean? He was that kind of guy. And one of the things, and I know it gets a little dicey because you can look at it a couple of different ways. I feel like Chase Utley is definitely undervalued outside of Philadelphia, even though he's one of the best offensive second basemen of all time. And as you mentioned, when he came up, there was talk that they were going to have to move him to first base because of his defense, and he improved so much of his defense, and he made one of the best plays in World Series history. And if he played for a team like the Yankees or something, it would be probably rated one of the best plays in World Series history when he faked the throw to first and threw home in Game 5 of the World Series against Tampa.
Yep.
It was unbelievable. I remember, like, Greg and I were sitting there in the stands, 300 level, and I said to him, I'm like, that's one of the best plays of all time in baseball when that happened because, like, that saved a run in a one-run game. It was unbelievable. So Chase Utley, certainly worthy. You talked about WAR right up there. I picked Jimmy for some of the intangibles, but also one of the things that pushed him over the top was, and I just seen this article the other day, he is one of 4 players ever in baseball, ever, to have a 20 home run, 20 triples, 20 doubles, and 20 stolen bases in a season. Only 4 guys have ever done it. And, like, when you talk in baseball, there's only 4 to have ever done it. That's insane. And to make it even a little crazier, there was only 2 guys until 2007 when Curtis Granderson and Jimmy Rollins both did it. But it happened in 1911, Frank Schultz. It happened in 1957, Willie Mays, who we say is the best baseball player of all time.
Yes.
And then Curtis Granderson, who is a really solid career. I think, honestly, his career probably is similar to Jimmy Rollins. But then you have Jimmy Rollins, who is the Phillies' all-time leading hit king. He has more hits than anyone in Phillies history as a Philly for a franchise. Like, just to clarify, I know Pete Rose played for the Phillies, but not for his whole career and things like that. But
right, he didn't sign with the Phillies till he was 38. Right.
Jimmy Rollins has more hits as a Philly than anyone else in history. And I just feel like, and again, yes, those, you could pick almost anyone from that squad. Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Hamels, you referred to. I know some people would throw like Victorino and like guys like that in there. And I understand you can make a case for all of them. I just feel like Jimmy brought something to that team, that swagger that was essential, and they kind of lived up. Like we talk sometimes about teammates writing checks that their teammates have to cash, and Jimmy certainly did that, but the team like backed him up. I feel like the team lived up to his expectations.
It was the perfect storm to have that swagger and attitude and confidence, proving that it wasn't cockiness because he was right. Like that's there's a thin line between confidence and cockiness, and the Phillies in 2007, 2008, 2009 really were able to capitalize on guarantees and the amount of confidence that certain players exhibited. And it's funny, you could come up with an entire Mount Rushmore easily, maybe even twice over, just for that team from 2007 through 2011. They were that
Oh,
impactful
absolutely.
on the Phillies as a program, as a baseball club. So, anything else to say about your four Phillies?
No, I mean, I think we're good there. Like you said, it's really hard. And baseball, I feel like, is maybe the hardest. Well, no, football is really hard too. But like when you look at like comparing the generations, it's so difficult. You know what I mean? In baseball, there's so much history, and like let's think that the Phillies were so bad for so much of their history that it's like it's kind of tough. Like all I have to go on are the numbers when I look at guys. Basically, I remember Mike Schmidt playing. I don't really remember a whole lot. I just remember that he was a Philly. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
And then he was very good, and all those things. Steve Carlton, that was before our time. Obviously Robin Roberts and Richie Ashburn. Richie Ashburn, the announcer, was around, but Richie Ashburn,
Right.
that was all before us. So like Jimmy Rollins, that's my wheelhouse. I know those guys.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but yeah, so. Yeah, I don't really have anything. I'd be interested to know what some other people think.
Yeah, I have.
I see in the comments.
I do have
in the comments that someone said it's a completely legit mountain, but I'd love to see some '93 Philly love that team.
I know.
And then they followed up. They said, I know there isn't a single player from that team that deserves to make the list, but it was a fun team.
No, I mean, well, you could make a '93 Phillies Rushmore too. Like they're not going to crack the overall, 120 almost 125, 130 years of the Phillies organization. They're not going to make it because I think the ones that we talked about, our combined 7, I feel like is a great start for anyone to pick 4 from.
Right.
We can easily make one for the '08 team and in that area, which I think you're pretty much looking at Rollins, Utley, Howard, Hamels, and then you're going to have people that really are high on Ruiz. Maybe you throw in Lidge or Victorino. But '93, I mean, oh boy. Lenny Dykstra finished second in the MVP vote that year.
Right.
He would obviously have to be on there. Darren Daulton, John Kruk. Where do you go with the 4th spot? Are you crazy and you want to throw Mitch Williams in there? I mean, just because of the optics, just like his name association, you could easily do that. But the amount of incredible players that were on that team with Mickey Morandini and Kevin Stocker, a mid-season call-up that ended up taking over the shortstop role for that team, Jim Eisenreich and was it Milt Thompson? Just an incredible amount of characters and what that was the first time that I really fell in love with baseball, was that early '90s team. The Phillies had been so bad until that '93 year, and it was just like magic. I remember listening to the games on radio while at my grandparents' farm, and just being so excited that the Phillies were actually good and they were a fun team to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I do have here an email from your dad about his Mount Rushmore candidates. So he got his top 4, and we touched on most of these. Mike Schmidt, included on both of ours, Steve Carlton and Robin Roberts, which were both on yours, and then his number 4 though was Jim Bunning, who we didn't give any love to in our discussion, but I know his name was floating there while I was doing my research. He just didn't make my cut, but definitely a candidate to be included. I believe his name was dropped in the athletics discussion on jersey numbers as well. And your dad gave a few honorable mentions, kind of like we talked about, and he threw out Grover Cleveland Alexander, so going way back with that one. And then 3 more modern era guys that we talked about: Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, and Cole Hamels. And then he also mentions Richie Ashburn as well. So a couple new additions there, but pretty much right where we had been with our discussion for the Phillies, and he follows that up with few that could get there in the future based on, literally right now. Bryce Harper and JT Realmuto both could get there in the future, depending on how the next few seasons go. And I completely agree there. I love Realmuto. I hope they are able to extend him.
Right. I would love to have to revisit this in a few years,
Yeah, that would be a positive sign for sure. So next, let's do the Flyers. And I'm going to let you go first, but since your dad sent one for each of them, I'm going to read his Flyers before we get into ours.
Okay.
I think I think we're going to be cycling through a lot here, although I know that I have a few different from both you and your dad. But your dads are Bobby Clark, Bernie Parent, Ron Hextall, and Bill Barber. So those are some pretty big names in Flyers history. And if you look at your list compared with your dad's, it is exactly the same. So why don't you get us up to speed with these 4 Flyers legends?
Of the 8 spots, 7 of them have been the same for me and my dad. However, he went on the list. Maybe he thinks Mount Rushmore, they're just going to put faces the whole way around the mountain. I don't know. But when I look at the Flyers, this one was tough for me. As of right now, these are I probably follow the Flyers the least of the 4. I still follow along and everything like that, but in terms of sit down to watch a hockey game, it probably happens the least of all of these teams right now at this point in my life. It wasn't always like that though. But when I look at it, there are Flyers players that I love, but I just I can't put them on the list over the guys that I have on here for me. And I, like you said, I have Clark, Parent, Barber, and Hextall are my 4. I almost left Hextall off because I'm can you go with 2 goalies? But I'm Hextall.
Can you go with 2 goalies and you're talking about the Flyers? I mean, that just goes to show how awful the Flyers have been for the last 25 years in goal.
Right. But I'm how can I leave those guys off? They're the best players on the best teams of the Flyers. To me, I had to go with those guys. Some close calls for me and were Simone Gagne. He was my favorite player when I was really into the Flyers for a long time. He was my favorite player. I also like John LeClair, man. When John LeClair would just plant himself in front of the crease, and just be an immovable force.
Right.
Some of those guys, I love Ron Brindamore and his crooked nose, all that stuff. Those were guys that I loved when I watched, but I'm I can't put any of those guys on there. The tough one, and this one I went back and forth on, was Eric Lindros. And again, I think this is, I don't mean this against him, but I feel the potential's there, and he's probably my 4B, but I have to go with Hextall for me as a Flyer. I know Lindros went on and played beyond his Flyers years and had more success again. But I feel while I don't blame him the way it was perceived at the time it happened, he kind of took a bad rap for a lot of that. I feel a lot of that has changed, or in some people's eyes anyway. I feel there's still, despite without the whole blame game thing, I feel there's still what could have been with Lindros, more so than with the other guys.
No, I get it. I mean, those 4, I think on the, if someone asks you on the spot and be name the 4 greatest Flyers, I feel the ones that you and your dad picked are, they make a lot of sense because, well, other than Hextall, they all have their number retired by the team, which is kind of a big deal. So, I definitely think 3 of them are from the heyday of the Broad Street Bullies and winning back-to-back World Cups, Stanley Cups. And then you have a goaltender that kind of transcended the game because of his brashness and his ability to score goals from his own goal and what he was able to do, for better or worse, as an executive in the league, both outside of Philly and in Philly. And despite what you think about him after he's left, he's built the core of the team that is winning now. Now, maybe he didn't pick the right coach and didn't add the right veteran presence, but, at the time of the season being put on hold, this Flyers team was comprised mostly of Hextall guys, and they were all very young and talented, and the Flyers were the best team, easily one of the best teams with the Bruins and Lightning in the East. And who knows what would have happened if the playoffs, if they could have played a few more weeks and gotten to the playoffs. But the Flyers were looking very, very strong. So Ron Hextall is a guy who was under consideration for me. Before I move on to mine, I'm just going to throw up on the screen one more time Justin's Mount Flyers, Bobby Clark, Perrant, Barber, and Hextall. So 2 goalies and 2 goal scorers, all of which played a lot of games for the Flyers. I think it's funny that both Perrant and Hextall both traded away by the Flyers before making a triumphant return. It's always interesting. Hockey always was one of those, to me, that you got a lot of homecomings. Like, teams always traded them or let them go in free agency when that came around, and then they always made their way back. And we just saw it recently with James Van Riemsdyk. And I know it happens in baseball too, but the hockey always seemed to stick out to me that there was a lot of people returning after they had already been sent packing once. But let's get to my Rushmore Flyers because it's different. I have only 1 overlap and only 2 players on my list. So what's it going to be? All right, so my Mount Flyers are Eric Lindros, Bobby Clark. I have pictured Lauren Hart, but I cheated and went with the Hart family. And Ed Snyder. I just don't know that you can write the history of the Flyers from the beginning to at least a decade or so ago, 15 years or so, without the 4 of them. Obviously, starting with Ed Snyder, well, because he was the founder and owner, and he was a big name up until his passing about 4 years ago. And he helped bring hockey to Philadelphia, and I think it's one of the best choices that a Philadelphia sports owner has ever done. Ed Snyder was beloved by the community, and he did a lot of great things for the Flyers. They couldn't get over the hump after early success, within the first 10 years of the team existing. But with the outpouring of love and support 4 years ago at his passing, I think everyone understands how significant a role Ed Snyder played in the history of the Philadelphia Flyers. Then Flyers fans know Lauren Hart now for being the anthem singer, but and everyone loves hearing her and her renditions of the variety of songs that she trots out to sing, usually the Star Spangled Banner, but God Bless America as well. But her father, Gene, was a longtime broadcaster, and a little bit before our time. Justin, he's not someone that maybe clicks with our generation, but I know our parents for sure, because I know my mom and dad talk often about Gene Hart calling Flyers games. So the Hart family, I think, is someone to be included in this list of Flyers greats. And then my 2 players are obvious. One already talked about by you and listed by your dad, Bobby Clark. I mean, what is there to say about Bobby Clark? He is Mr. Flyer when it comes to a player. It's him. He leads the franchise in points, over 1,200. He played over 1,100 games for the team. He averaged over a point per game. And, he was the heart and soul and the full embodiment of a scoring machine, but also toughness. And, the city just fell in love with those teams in the 70s. And, Bobby Clark obviously played a huge role with the Flyers after the fact. And despite his semi-retirement now, he still is present with everything to do with the Flyers. So he has to be on there. Just like Mike Schmidt has to be on the Phillies one, Bobby Clark has to be on the Flyers one. And my last one is Eric Lindros, and I know you talked about leaving him off. I wanted to get a quasi-modern player on the list, and I just don't think anyone embodies the style of play that Philadelphia wants than Eric Lindros. And while he had issues with the team and management during the end of his career with the team, honestly, I think in the end he was proven to be correct in a lot of his assessment, and he was very forward thinking when it came to player health, especially surrounding concussions. And thankfully, the organization and Lindros have reconciled, and they have given him his due. He's gotten strong ovations when he's returned for alumni events. And a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, this past January, his number was retired with all-time Flyers greats. And it was a deserving honor because, in terms of his points per game, no one was better in orange and black than Eric Lindros. He averaged 1.36 points per game with the Philadelphia Flyers, which is just absolutely incredible. When he was on the ice, he was a difference maker. When he was fully healthy, he was what everyone thought he could be. Unfortunately, injuries derailed his career, and he never became the next one. But when he was healthy, those mid to late 90s teams were absolutely dominant when he was on the ice. And, he was one of my first athletic role models. He's someone that I always looked up to and wanted to, envision myself being able to play like, which I know was nowhere close to the real thing. But, he's someone that will always jump into my mind when someone mentions the Flyers. A couple of people that missed out on my list but were in consideration. I think really the only one of late that has a chance to push this, and it depends on probably how the next 2 or 3 years goes, is Claude Giroux. He's been team captain for a few years, and he's been with the squad since, I think, 2008. He played a few games in 2008. He started to make a name for himself with that crazy 2010 run to the Stanley Cup Finals, and it's become his team essentially after that season, or after the 2011 season. It's been all about Giroux. I hated leaving Bill Barber off for sure. That one hurt, but and the goalies too. I know my mom always loved Bernie Perrant and Ron Hextall, but I just felt these other four to me were more deserving. And there's a lot from that 70s era that I wanted to consider. And you mentioned a few from like the 90s too. You mentioned Rod Brindamore, and I always enjoyed John LeClair and Mark Recchi, and on the defensive side of things, Eric Desjardins. So there's a lot of guys that I was able to consider, but in the end, I had to go with Lindros, Clark, Hart, and Snyder.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you were naming guys on the current team, I know this is getting way ahead of ourselves. I agree. Giroux would be the guy who, if there's someone on the team who has a shot at it, you would have to put him at the top of that list. But I look at don't sleep on my boy Carter Hart. Maybe we can get a third boy on there eventually. So we'll see.
If the existing or the current embodiment of the Flyers can win, or even just maybe make the finals once or twice in the next 5 years, I think you'll see a lot of these guys have strong consideration. If Giroux can finish out his career and be a lifelong Flyer, and they win a cup or get to another one or two,
then chalk him, put him up there right away.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's closing in. If he can stay healthy for about another 2 seasons, he should hit 1,000 games played with the Flyers, and only one player has ever done that, and that's Bobby Clark. So
yeah, that's not so.
All right, so I'm trying to see, do we have any comments about the Flyers here? I'm trying to make sure that I catch everything. Oh, yeah, we definitely have some new ones here.
I've kind of been monitoring there.
Yeah, your dad asking about the enforcer, and then Tom saying Dave Schultz.
Right.
Yep.
And Ian asked about Giroux, if they win a cup, is he on the list? And I honestly, basically I look at it, if they were to win a cup, to me, that would mean that Giroux would have to be playing well on a Stanley Cup team for the Flyers. It becomes hard to take him off,
right.
at that point.
Well, like I said, he's already third in games played. He's fourth in points in a Flyers uniform. Both of those things, he will end up being second or third. And if he wins a cup, or if he would win, if they would win 2 cups or something in his final years, I don't know that you could keep him off. I mean, by that point, he'll have played. He's already at 14 seasons with the Flyers. Just listen to him as being a rookie in 2007. Now, I think that was just a few games. I think his first full season might have been 2008. But, that means this year would have been his 13th full season with the team. So you're talking about a long time with one squad, and if you can get back or win a cup or two and be second or third in games played and points for the organization, Drew would have to crack that list, I would think.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's end the Flyers here and move on to the next one, and that is going to be the 76ers. So I'm going to start off with this one, and then we'll make sure we get your dad's list in before coming to you, Justin. Now, this one, to me, I feel like there was only about 5 or 6 that would be in the running, and I think, Justin, you and I had a pretty good overlap here. I think we differed maybe on one, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me see. So mine are, we are off by only one. So I had Julius Erving, Allen Iverson, Charles Barkley, and Maurice Cheeks. So you know which one we're different on then, Justin. But the one that we're different on is the only other one that I really considered. And I know there are going to be some people wondering where Wilt Chamberlain is. And Justin and I have mentioned this a bunch of times, specifically off air. I don't know, we don't talk basketball too much on air, but Wilt Chamberlain, despite having success with the Sixers, he wasn't a long-time member of the 76ers. I don't know that most people would, I think, see him in a Lakers uniform, I would think. I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, most of his best years were not with the Sixers. He had phenomenal years with the Sixers, but it was a short run, and it's just he you could consider him because of how great he was,
right?
But when you look at like the guys that make this list, their careers peaked as Sixers, or even not peaked, but like they had a strong run as a Sixer.
Yeah.
And you could, So I think. Because it's hard to say that Charles Barkley peaked as a Sixer because he played on some great teams after that, but he was the best player on those Sixers.
He was a dominant player for the Sixers for 8 years.
For a long time. He played for the Sixers for 8 years. Like it wasn't like just 2 or 3. So.
Yeah, so that's my 4 there before talking a little bit about each of them. But Dr. J, AI, Charles Barkley, Maurice Cheeks. Then the only other 2 I considered, Wilt Chamberlain has to be considered because he's one of the all-time greatest basketball players, and he played in Philadelphia, and your dad mentions him. He scored 100 points in a game. Like, think about, like, how crazy is that? People are super excited to see someone drop 50, and then, you see someone hit 60 or 70, and people just go nuts. But this guy dropped himself triple digits in a game.
At Hershey
At Hershey Park Arena. So, that's kind of a big deal. But because of his success mostly being outside the 76ers uniform, I didn't include him. But he obviously needs to be in the discussion. And if you include him, obviously, I'm completely okay with that because he's one of the greatest basketball players to ever do it. But to me, I went more with the longer-term Philly guys or guys that contributed a lot to the 76ers, and it really Julius Erving was my number 1. I think he's in that respect, when you think about longevity, Julius Erving is the guy. He played there for 11 seasons or parts of 11 seasons, over 800 games, and essentially basketball's version of WAR, of wins above replacement, is VORP, and Julius Erving leads the way for his time with the 76ers. So he was definitely my number 1 on there, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. And I knew Allen Iverson would be on there just because he was the guy that I grew up watching and enjoying, and he was made 76ers basketball relevant, in our high school time, and it was fun to watch his 76ers team play, and he made 76ers basketball relevant again after it had kind of gone downhill after some of the dominant teams of the early to mid 80s. They had Barkley in between that time, but that was it. AI put the team on his shoulders, and they found a few pieces to go around him, and they had to go up, unfortunately, with one of the greatest teams ever in that 2001 Lakers squad. but Allen Iverson's time in Philadelphia, while it wasn't perfect on or off the court, he's clearly one of the top 4 76ers players and deserves to be on the mountain with the likes of Charles Barkley, who again was putting up ridiculous statistical feats on some really dismal Philadelphia teams. The 4th spot was toughest because it was down to Maurice Cheeks, Moses Malone, or Wilt Chamberlain. And again, I favored Cheeks because in a Sixers uniform, he has the 4th highest VORP and played in over 850 games, actually a few more than Dr. J did for the 76ers. And obviously, Mo Cheeks has also had a long coaching career with a stop in Philadelphia. And your dad actually mentions in his email talking about loyalty, and Mo Cheeks has certainly showed that for the 76ers. So those are my 4. Justin, we overlap a lot, but I'll let you talk about your 4, especially the one that I haven't touched on much yet.
Okay, so absolutely. Barkley's on there. We kind of mentioned he had some great years elsewhere, but he also had a lot of success in Philadelphia for some really bad Sixers teams. But I had to include him because he's a Hall of Famer. And honestly, when you look at the Sixers and you talk about Hall of Famers, you can kind of get stretched pretty thin at points. But then Iverson's on the list. I'll come back to him just to talk to him a little bit. Dr. J, man, when you look at the numbers, they're just absolutely absurd. Like incredible, absolutely incredible. I put Moses Malone on, and this one's tough because for the same reason I don't include Wilt Chamberlain on there, because he didn't play a ton in Philly. You look at Moses Malone, and not all of it, there isn't a ton of time spent in Philly during that time. However, the time that was spent there includes the year he comes to Philadelphia, they win a championship.
Right, 1983.
So it's tough to not include that, you know what I mean? Because you look at that time. But just think about that. I mean, 2 of the guys, so 2 of the guys for basketball that I have, Moses Malone and Julius Erving, overlapped in time, you know what I mean? And it led to championships.
Yep.
And then you also had, if you go back to the Flyers, 3 of the guys I had overlapped in time.
Yeah.
And it led to 2 championships. And then if you go to the Phillies, 2 of the guys, Carlton and Schmidt, they overlapped in time as well. So, man, imagine when you get a couple guys that are on your best evers at the same time, it's a good thing for the team. Imagine that. But I have Moses Malone on there. You look at his career, obviously, there's a lot of things on there. However, it doesn't all come with the Sixers. However, you also get a Finals MVP in there, which is kind of that's a big one for me.
Mm-hmm.
So he got the nudge. Mo Cheeks absolutely could have gotten it. In the coaching aspect, you could throw that in there. One of the things that I find really interesting is and you mentioned it, and by the numbers, Dr. J is the guy. But oh my gosh, I love Allen Iverson. He's the first. Well, that's not true. Michael Jordan, when I was a kid, was the NBA guy that you watch. But in terms of Sixer, Iverson was the first Sixer that I actually liked watching. When Barkley was on the Sixers were so bad. I honestly didn't, and I was little. I didn't watch a lot of Sixers games.
Barkley left after
'92,
I mean? So
right. So I didn't see a lot of Barkley playing. I knew who he was, and I knew the Sixers were bad. But Iverson, that was when I was in high school and beyond, and he was the best player on that finals team that went against the Lakers, and it wasn't even close. The next best player is Dikembe Mutombo, but or Aaron McKee, who won
Aaron
Sixth Man of the
Sixth
Year,
Man,
was
yeah.
Right. The second best player on the team was the 6th man. What's that tell you? Mutombo was a huge acquisition that year, but they only got him because the center they had broke his finger and they had to trade because it was late in the season. They needed somebody to be a center. Iverson was unbelievable, and when they won Game 1 and he had the iconic step over of Ty Lue. That was the only postseason game that Lakers team lost that year. They were undefeated coming into that game, and then they won the next 4 against the Sixers. But that was the only game they lost in the playoffs. That is one of the best teams of all time, and Iverson single-handedly beat them in Game 1.
Yeah.
And he just had no help there. Iverson, gets a rap, for all kinds of things, but he was on the all-rookie team. He was the MVP in the 2000-2001 season, 11-time All-Star, 3-time steals champion. He was unbelievable. And you match it up where he's 6 foot if you're measuring him with new sneakers on. He pound for pound is one of the best players in NBA history. And so I give him the nod. And this is one of those things where I say it and I mean it, but I understand people don't always do it the same way. But to me, Iverson's the best Sixer of all time. And I know that's blasphemous to some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. Allen Iverson's the best Sixer of all time. So, I put it out there.
Hey, you can put out there whatever you want. It doesn't mean everyone's got to pick it up. I mean,
well, now it's on the internet.
The internet is forever, so we'll see how that goes for you. I do want to. I missed that my dad had texted us during our Phillies segment to say that he would replace Chase with either Steve Carlton or Jim Bunning on my list. He favors Carlton or Bunning over Chase. But I haven't heard him about any of the others, which is a little surprising. Although maybe this will get him to text again with you saying Allen Iverson is the greatest 76er of all time. Because I think he's squarely in the Dr. J camp for sure. So, all right. So, your dad points out that Sixers have only won 2 championships, and the first was with Wilt Chamberlain.
I don't believe so. Didn't they win in 80 and 83?
Yes.
Wilt Chamberlain retired in 1973.
Okay. Well, you would know that better than I because I don't know much about the basketball other than 83 and 2001.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's amazing that I can look
that
up.
You know what? He played for the Philadelphia Warriors.
Yes.
I think before.
But that was in the 60s.
Yeah. So that might be so that I I had overlooked that. I forgot he played for the Warriors before he played for the Sixers.
59 through 62, but then they move to San Francisco.
Right. So
Yes.
Well, but anyway, there is an extended time there, but it is a little different. So.
Yeah. Oh, he played for the 76ers from 65 through 68, and then moved on to the Lakers in 68 through 73.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in 61, 62, and when he was 25 for the Philadelphia Warriors, he averaged 50 points a game.
Right. That's crazy. To average 50 points.
Yeah. I mean, his time with the Warriors was absolutely absurd. The Philadelphia Warriors. His years with the Sixers, he only averaged 33.5, 24.3, and 24.1. Only. That's half his output at his time when he was with the Warriors. I mean, come on. What a slacker. Right. What a slacker. So, all right, well, let's wrap up the 76ers discussion and move on to football and talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. And since this is right up your alley, Justin, I'm going to let you go first. So let us know who is on your Mount Rushmore for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay, so my Mount Rushmore for the Eagles is going to be Steve Van Buren, Reggie White, Chuck Bednarik, and then here's the one that can throw some people off. It's going to be Andy Reid, right? And I'll explain that one in a bit. First of all, Steve Van Buren, when I'm looking at stats, running back for the Eagles, 4 of his 8 years, he's led the league in rushing, 4-time league rushing champ. That's absurd, even way back when he was playing. So had to put him on the list. Chuck Bednarik, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, or one of the greatest players of all time. He played all over the place. And there was a bit when he was, there was a stretch where he was kind of not I don't know, kind of angry with modern football, and it was a little rough with the Eagles. But I think they kind of patched things up for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. Reggie White, the Minister of Defense, just, oh my gosh, like he's one of the greatest defensive linemen of all time.
Right.
And when you watch his plays, if you watch Reggie White highlights, how he just throws around grown men, like tackles, like 300-pound guys, he just one hand throws them out of the way. It's unbelievable. All right. And then, so here we go. I'm going to go with Andy Reid. And the reason I'm going to go with Andy Reid is because of the long-term influence he had. First of all, the Eagles were awful most of my life until Andy Reid came on, right? So Andy Reid comes on, turns things around rather quickly. Then I know he didn't get over the hump, but he took them from a team that was always losers to expecting Super Bowls. And the fact that he didn't win a Super Bowl was, in Philly was enough for people to drive him out. But this is where I look at it. So I understand there are other people you could put on the list, but if Reid wasn't with the Eagles, then Peterson doesn't come to the Eagles, right? Like, that's the connection. That was the connection that Lurie had. That's why he hired Doug Peterson, was because of his ties to Andy Reid and the familiarity there. And all of the things that we currently have with the Eagles, including Super Bowl 52, like, none of that happened if it weren't for the groundwork that was laid by Andy Reid. I almost put Jeff Lurie on here because he took the Eagles from a laughingstock to one of, again, this is my bias coming through, but one of the best organizations in football. And so Jeff Lurie as an owner was someone I considered putting on the list. I took it down a notch and put Andy Reid in there. I know he didn't get the job done, but he laid the foundation. And without him, none of the success that we have enjoyed with the Eagles happened. Or maybe it does, but you can't play that game. It's like, oh, well, if they would have hired Belichick, maybe they'd go to every Super Bowl. Like, no, that's not how it works. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think they hired Doug Peterson. I don't think they have the success that they've had if they hadn't been through that stretch with Andy Reid at first, where he helped change the culture in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with Andy Reid's contributions, and he was under consideration for me just because of his coaching success all time, and majority of that has come with the Eagles, but with him not winning the Super Bowl in Philadelphia, he's not someone that I could put on that list. And my list is interesting just because, as I'm sure most of the people watching or listening to the show know, that I'm not an Eagles fan. It's the only Philadelphia team that I don't root for. So this is me coming at it from maybe a slightly unbiased perspective, but also not as well informed. Like, I know enough about my Eagles to not make a fool of myself, but I'm not as invested. So it may not matter as much as someone like Justin or your dad. And I want to talk about your dad's here because he sent in the Rushmore, but your dad is very upset about the way we talked about the 76ers because he would like to point out that they did not win the championship in 80. It was in the 66-67 season with Wilt Chamberlain. They set a record for winning percentage that year, going 68-13, finishing first, winning the championship over the Warriors 4-2. Wilt was the MVP. They had massive amount of success after his departure in the mid-70s. Obviously, we're talking about the era of Dr. J, but they lost to the finals in 77. They lost the finals again in 1980, and then in 82 before winning in 83. So those teams were electric, but could only manage the one world championship after the 83 season. But the first 76ers title was during the 66-67 season with Wilt Chamberlain. So I do want to get that on the record. So that
I'm glad you got that straight, because he probably would have failed to follow social distancing and come over here and yelled at me.
For sure. So let's get to your dad's Eagles Rushmore candidates. And he goes with Reggie White, Steve Van Buren, saying that he's the leading single season rusher and has 2 professional championships. Chuck Bednarik, 14 years, missed only 3 games, led them to the 60 championship. And Harold Carmichael. You mentioned a few of them, actually 3 of them, in White, Van Buren, and Bednarik. And you went with Andy Reid. He went with Harold Carmichael. So again,
I almost went with Carmichael. Carmichael was on my list, and I took him off and put Reid on there.
Yeah,
Carmichael, now a Hall of Famer.
right. And he was also on my short list. Again, I think I ended up having about 7 Eagles that I needed to whittle down. And you're going to see 2 of the 4 that both your dad and you mentioned are on mine. So why don't I pull up my list here and get to it. And there's definitely going to be one that may be a bit of a surprise here. But again, I tried to balance my eras a bit. Well, let's just see what I went with. So appearing on my list and yours and your dad's is Chuck Bednarik. And that should be no surprise if you, if you know me and the way I like football, and a two-way guy playing center and linebacker. That sounds like someone that I would really enjoy watching play football. He was just
that is literally your like MO.
If he would have wore 54, like all he needed to do is wear 54, and it would have been perfect. But yeah, Bednarik, I mean, he's got a trophy named after him. You got to make a Rushmore somewhere if you got a trophy named after you, especially one of the best college awards out there is named after him. So yes, Chuck Bednarik is on my Rushmore. Up next here in my list on the faces and he is included on mine, is Brian Dawkins, because I think he's the face of the Eagles, and despite him not winning the Super Bowl while he was in Philadelphia, he was an incredible defender, an incredible player. He ranks 3rd all time in Pro Football Reference's approximate value with the club. So I think...
Oh my gosh. You're going to get no argument from me. That man deserves it.
I'm always a Brian Dawkins fan, and I won the Brian Dawkins Award when I was in high school, not from the football team, but from the marching band. So Brian Dawkins always has a place on my football team. And now this is the one that I think maybe is surprising to people, and I really felt like someone had to be representative of the Super Bowl championship. And it's too early to put Doug Peterson up there. You know, things could change, but I just can't get on that bandwagon. And because, the jury's still out in certain capacities on Carson Wentz, he wasn't the guy leading the team to that Super Bowl, so I couldn't put him on there. And I'm not joining Tom and anointing Nick Foles just because he was the quarterback on the Super Bowl team. If you start telling me that just because you won a championship, you deserve to be on the mountain, that is going to lead to a slippery slope for a lot of awards and recognition. So just because Foles was the quarterback when they won the Super Bowl doesn't mean too much to me. So I couldn't put him on there. So I went with a guy who... honestly, I think at times is incredibly and criminally underrated, but is one of the best defenders and has been that way for, you're closing in on a decade now, and that's Fletcher Cox. He's a top 10 player in Philadelphia history. If you like the approximate value that Pro Football Reference uses, he's a guy that I think, a few more years and he's going to work his way up even higher and has the potential to be a top 5 player while wearing Eagles green. I don't know that he's quite going to get the Brian Dawkins level, but I think Fletcher Cox, if he has a few more successful years, and especially if the team has success along with him, I think he definitely deserves to be in consideration. And then my last guy is one that you and your dad also mentioned, and that is Reggie White, because he's one of the greatest football players ever. It's a shame that he couldn't finish his career with the Eagles and decided to move on and essentially was the driving force behind modern free agency, but that's the way it works sometimes. And his contributions both to the Eagles and as the NFL defender at large can't be overstated, and absolutely deserves a place on the Eagles list. Harold Carmichael and Ron Jaworski were 2 of the others I considered, and another one that I really contemplated putting on there, but I think I kind of went with Dawkins over him, was Donovan McNabb, which I know a lot of people may not want to hear that and still have a sour taste with the way things went with him from time to time, but he was the starting quarterback for the Eagles for essentially 11 seasons, and, he was absolutely electric for many years, and one of the reasons that they were as successful as they were under Andy Reid. And Andy Reid, another guy that I considered putting on, but just because he couldn't get over the top and get that Lombardi, he just fell a bit short. But I don't hold it against anyone like Justin that put him on the list. So that's where I'm at as someone who isn't a diehard Eagles fan. Those are the ones that jump out to me, and I'm sure some people may be scratching their heads with Fletcher Cox, but I felt that someone from the Super Bowl team should be on there. And to me, because of his tenure with the squad and his dominance at times on that defensive line, he's the guy that jumped out and is the one that I'm putting on there.
Yeah, no, I like the Fletcher Cox pick, and I feel like he's one of the most underrated guys in the NFL right now. I say that. I know people who are really paying attention, know how good he is, but I feel like if he played for a different team again or was a bigger name, I'm not saying he's Aaron Donald. They're not the same player, but there are times where Fletcher Cox plays like that dominant style of football, and I feel like it's just for whatever reason, maybe he's not in LA or whatever, it's not the same push that others get. But I'll take Fletcher Cox over almost any defensive lineman, especially those interior guys in the NFL. He's unbelievable, and he played. You could probably say he's the best defender on the Super Bowl team, the team that won the Super Bowl championship, and that says a heck of a lot when you are the best defender on the best team. Now I know that defense gave up a bunch of points in the Super Bowl, but in the games leading up to that, they didn't. You talk about the defense pretty much got into the Super Bowl, and then they were able to get it together offensively in the Super Bowl. So pretty amazing.
For sure. So, a lot of great discussion tonight about our picks, and obviously this is something that not everyone's going to agree with us on, and that's cool. Leave your Rushmores for Philly sports in the comments, or hey, if you're a fan of another team, throw it in there. Maybe at the start of our next show, I'll throw out what I think would be my Dolphins Rushmore, which you can pick two.
That would be that.
Honestly, you should probably be able to pick 3 out of the 4 without even. In terms of if you're guessing what mine would be, you should be able to pick 3 of the 4 immediately. Although I think I could name all 4 right now. So it's honestly, I think it's pretty easy because I'm picking Dan Marino and Zach Thomas, and I don't know how you can't pick Don Shula or Larry Zonka. So I don't know. Maybe that would be a lot more straightforward than I'm thinking. I know there'll be people that outside of my mind that wouldn't include Zach Thomas on that list, but to me, for my Miami Dolphins fandom, it's got to be Marino, Thomas, Shula, and Zonka. And I wasn't even around to watch Zonka play, but he's Larry freaking Zonka. Larry Zonka is going to make that mountain. So
Thomas makes it over Jason Taylor?
Yeah, to me, yeah. I love Jason Taylor, and he's a Hall of Famer, and he deserves to be. But in my view, I would put Zach Thomas there, and that's an immense amount of bias coming from me. But if it's my Dolphins Mount Rushmore, it's Zach Thomas, Dan Marino, Don Shula, and Larry Zonka. So, all right, so we're gonna wrap it up there. We went a little bit long, but I knew this would be a topic that would generate a lot of discussion with at least Justin and me. But I'm glad a lot of people joined in on the Facebook page. And, make sure you like and follow us across social media, especially Facebook and Twitter. And check us out on SoundCloud and on YouTube. And subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a variety of other podcatchers. We will not be here next week. Next week is Easter Sunday, so we will have the night off. But we'll be back in 2 weeks, which will be our NFL draft preview. That is coming up in just over 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks from now. It's on Thursday.
They'll be doing it just like we're doing the show.
Exactly. Yeah. They want to be us. So They
We're
just decided,
trendsetters.
hey, we're going to forego all that money and what Las Vegas can bring, and we're going to just do it remotely. But they're probably going to get killer ratings because people are going to have starved another 2.5 weeks of sports, and that's going to be the first thing. Well, I think they could have a lot of success.
I saw somebody say they're like, don't get me wrong, I'm going to watch, but they're like, I really have no idea what exactly it is I'm going to be watching, and I think it was Rich Eisen chimed in. He's like, "You're not the only one," or something like that.
Excellent. So, all right, Justin, thanks for calling in again. Have a good work
thank you.
of digital online learning as that gets launched in the Wilson School District.
Yeah, getting ready for my online office hours tomorrow. So.
Yeah. So, good luck to all the students and the teachers going back to do that. That'll be a learning experience for everyone involved. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Continue to social distance, and hopefully we can get out of this soon enough for everyone's health and future, and more narrow-minded to get the sports world back and have some live action stuff to talk about rather than made up stuff. Although this has been really fun the last few weeks. So thanks for joining us. This wraps up episode 302 of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Like I said, we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk NFL draft.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, brought to you by Mays Sandwich Shop. Woo-hoo! You can watch each weekly episode live on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. You can also rate and review us on many of these platforms as well. We'd love to hear from you. Send your emails to the Mays Sandwich Shop inbox at joemaysandjraff@gmail.com. The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is a part of the JMNJR Radio Network, home to other productions such as the Bulldog Hour, Tangents with Friends, and Nat Chats with Dad. Until next time.